Hi, I'm Rob Eshman. I'm the national editor of the Forward, and I'm honored to be here this afternoon for Rosh Hashanah for a discussion with Ali Abu Awwad, Palestinian peace activist, and Ambassador Dennis Ross. There's so much to talk about. I'm going to give both of our guests a very brief and inadequate discussion because you could go on Google yourself and find out all about their remarkable careers. Partly because I want to jump right into a discussion with them. Ali Abu Awwad is a Palestinian nonviolence activist and the founder of Tahrir Change, the Palestinian nonviolence movement. He spent his entire life fighting for Palestinian rights and leading a nonviolent movement in the Middle East. Ambassador Dennis Ross is a scholar, author, and diplomat who, since 1970 to the 1970s, has played a leading role in shaping U.S. involvement in the Middle East peace process and dealing directly with parties in negotiation. He is a William Davidson Distinguished Fellow at the Washington Institute in Near East Policy. So I want to welcome both our guests, Ambassador Ross and Ali. How are you both?
Thank you.
Fine, thank you.
Okay, good. Well, there's so much happening in the news right now, and I think we'd be remiss if we didn't start with the news. So let's get your reactions to what happened yesterday. Yesterday, I think it was, with the signing in the White House of the UAE, Bahrain, and Israeli normalization. Dennis, I'll start with you. Is this good news for the new year?
Look, I think it is good news because, in a sense, what it shows, the region can be transformed. Obviously, it depends where you're sitting to see whether or not it's good news. Palestinians view it as kind of a betrayal because they felt that there shouldn't be normalization so long as Palestine, the Palestinians are under occupation. On the other hand, many of the Arabs feel that the Palestinians shouldn't be able to freeze the region when they have their own needs. And the Palestinians show no sign of having a leadership that can change. First, there's a division between Fatah and Hamas. Secondly, the leadership in the West Bank seems to be largely incapable of making big decisions. So their attitude is, look, we can't put ourselves on hold when we have real needs and real interests. And the irony that has been missed by some of the critics is that the UAE, when they did this deal, they linked what they were getting to the Israelis not acting and adopting and carrying out annexation vis-a-vis the Palestinians. So notwithstanding that Prime Minister Netanyahu talks about peace for peace, this was not peace for peace. These are not countries that border Israel. These are not countries that were in a state of war with Israel. These are not countries that had their own territories, controlled or occupied by the Israelis. Egypt and Jordan each had been in a state of war. They had fought wars with the Israelis, lost lots of soldiers. This is a completely different circumstance. But still, the UAE linked the issues and said no normalization if there's annexation. And so, in a sense, what they did is they said, when we make a move towards the Israelis, there has to be some kind of move towards the Palestinians. In this case, it was to prevent a negative move. All subsequent Arab states that move partially or totally towards normalization can also require something from the Israelis towards the Palestinians that could be commensurate with what it is they're doing vis-a-vis the Israelis. So smart diplomacy now would take, in a sense, Arab states that want to move towards the Israelis, talk with them, talk with the Israelis, talk with the Palestinians about what would be steps that could be taken towards the Palestinians that would put us in a position where peace becomes more possible. I worry, I'm interested to hear what Ali has to say. I worry about a Palestinian position that says it is so angry because of the sense of betrayal, so locked into a narrative that nothing can change unless all of their requirements are met, that what will happen is the Palestinians will simply be left behind, which, by the way, does no favor to Israel. Because in the end, even as Israel is able to make peace in the region and reflects, importantly, what others in the region see as important to them, the Palestinians will still be there. They're not going anyplace. I don't
Well,
want
I
to give
wanted
up
to
the
get
mandate
Ali's
of the
response
state.
to that.
Well,
Um, Ali, from your perspective, do you see it's going to lead to what Dennis is talking about, entrenchment and bitterness, or do you see this as a positive thing, or can it be turned into a positive thing?
Well, first of all, I would like to wish a happy new year to all the Jewish people on everywhere. And in my opinion, as an activist on the ground, I think we have been paying prices of the intervening of others in our conflict. When others propose different proposals, I think Jewish and Palestinian are paying the price of the one side steps. On the other hand, for sure, I am with solutions. For sure, we want the Arab countries to be
So, do you think
involved.
that, to the extent this leads to more normalization between? Oh, I didn't.
If we wanna speak about normalization, and if we wanna do normalization, we have to respect the rules of normalization. I think the heart of the problem is the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Going around it and doing normalization with others, in my opinion, we are encouraging the problem on the ground. We are not solving it. I always call the people to be pro solution, not to be pro these or pro those. I'm definitely trying and every day trying to protect any drop of blood to be wasted in this conflict. But I don't want also, on the other hand, to see a situation where Palestinians are left in the corner while Israel is doing what Israel is doing on the ground from one hand, on the other hand, engaging others around the problem and around the Palestinian cause and not solving the Palestinian cause. I totally believe that the solution between Israel and Palestine will be the gate and the normal gate for Israel to normalize its relation, not just with the Emirates or with Bahrain. It will be a huge opportunity to normalize with the all Arab and Muslim countries. So if we talk about solution, let's do it the right way. This is my biggest concern.
can I just comment on this? First of all, Ali, I very much respect who you are and what you've been committed to doing. I very much respect what you embody. And had the Palestinian leadership adopted your approach, my guess is the connection with the Israeli public would have put enormous pressure on any Israeli leadership to be responsive. We are where we are. My worry right now is twofold. One, it isn't only the UAE and Bahrain that have made these decisions. There are other Arab states that may not move as far as they are moving, but they will move towards the Israelis, even if it's in a lesser way. Partly because the region is creating all these challenges for them, whether they're security and cyber, whether they're COVID-19 and economic implications, whether it's a function of drought change in terms of water and food security. They see something to be gained from the Israelis. So they're going to continue to do this. The question in my mind is, how do you take advantage of the linkage that was produced by the UAE, meaning no normalization if there's going to be annexation? How do you get other Arab states to, in a sense, say, okay, we're going to take these steps towards Israel, but here's what we require the Israelis to do towards the Palestinians? And it can be a range of different areas. It can be in the water area. It can be in the food security area. An example is Palestinians have an acute problem in terms of water. There's much that could be done that the Israelis could do to ease that, to help with wastewater projects, number one. Number two, they have an acute housing problem. The Area C could be opened up. Area C, 60% of the West Bank, could be opened up for legal Palestinian construction of housing, which would be good both for immediate needs in terms of housing, but also for employment. You can make it more political. My point is, you can make it more political by saying, okay, we're going to expand the area under Palestinian Authority. All of these aren't going to produce a solution right now, but they can be building blocks towards a solution. And what I hope is that rather than simply saying we can't be a part of this, if Palestinians were to come up with a menu of different steps that would be important from a Palestinian standpoint, that could be integrated into diplomacy.
But Dennis, there's two things, a question for both of you, but it seems like the peace or the normalization that's going on is between Israel and these countries with very strong autocratic leaders, dictatorships, Emiratis, places where there's absolutely no question who's in charge. It seems to me, Ali, the problem with the Palestinians, at least from an outsider perspective, is you don't have a strong leader who's in charge who can make these decisions. Is that, do you feel like the leadership issue in the Palestinian is really decisive here? It's really something that it's an obstacle?
Well, for me, when the U.S. started proposing the deal of the century, I wrote even publicly and advised the Palestinian political leadership, saying it's the time to come up now with the Palestinian peace plan, that it has been never proposed to anyone. We always relied on others. And Ambassador Dennis, don't misunderstand me when I talked about the third party. For sure, we need the third party. The problem is, how does the third party and which role that the third party is playing? Number two, it's not about social change that we want to achieve as Palestinians. I mean, it's not about more housing and it's not about more permission. Definitely, as a leader in Taghyir movement, change movement, for sure we want to guarantee new conditions on the ground. But on the other hand, we also want the whole world with us and with Israel to design a vision that will secure our steps on the ground, because you cannot just look for like 60% as you mentioned, not as part of a bigger vision that can guarantee dignity for both sides. And by the way, I don't believe in the frozen model of the two state. It seems like it's not going to work anymore. We need to think, especially the Palestinian leadership, not just to propose the peace plan, but also to consider all of the changes that has happened on the ground. And finally, I'm not speaking in behalf of the Palestinian people, and I'm not representing the Palestinian political leadership, but as a leader on the ground who's part of both, I can tell you that Palestinian is not looking for healing or just nice steps with empathy. They want their national identity to be secure. And definitely, as an activist, I always say, if the peace agreement will not consider the two truths of the two people of this land, for them to practice who they are with their beliefs in a fashion of dignity and not on the expense of each other, this is what I call peace. But there is peace that you do as a collective plan on the ground that can speak even about the Saudis, and there is peace that you can do with your neighbor, like example, while your far neighbor is getting angry and angry. We are part of the Arab region. We are part of the whole international community. And I think we deserve to be respected. And my political leadership has an important role now, not to be relied, not on Emirates, not on the Arabs or the US. Sorry, I think that my political leadership has to turn their eyes and their efforts to their own people by engaging them in a national nonviolence movement as the only solution, not just to face new plans on the ground that has been implemented on our expense, but also to engage the people and design a new vision. It's the time that Palestinian will tell the whole world, not about the general political vision, but even to go to details and propose a whole plan to the whole world. Finally, any step on the ground that will respect the two truths and engage the two leadership, I will be part of it blindly.
Ali, do you have faith that your leadership, the Palestinian leadership, will do any of that?
Regarding the recent circumstances and the recent conditions and all the process of leadership in Palestine, we have a huge problem in leadership. We have an interior lack of unity. Let us say the truth. We have lack of support, I mean political support, by the Israeli side, and even lack of trust, lack of belief in anything. We have divide. I think the Palestinian political leadership is facing one of the most critical period of their time now, and I'm very worried that they will lose the control from their hand in the community, where it can take us to another circle of blood that we as Palestinians and Israelis will be the losers. Uh, I think now the Palestinian people are facing the mirror for the first time to redesign and rethink and reestablish new thoughts, new proposal politically, internationally, and interiorly.
Dennis, first of all, do you think that the next Jewish year, this year, we'll see a normalization with Saudi Arabia? And you mentioned that these countries could ask for things. They could ask for more housing for Palestinians, better water. But it seems like that's pretty small potatoes for what Saudi Arabia could ask for. What do you think they could ask for in exchange for normalization with Israel? What do you think they could ask from Israel?
Well, I think this is not going to be a binary choice where it's all normalization or it's zero. What you're going to see is a kind of gradual approach. Bear in mind, with the UAE and Bahrain, this didn't appear overnight. They were moving towards normalization for the last decade. Starting in 2015, the UAE allowed the Israelis to have an office in Abu Dhabi as part of the International Renewable Energy Agency. They allowed Israeli athletes to come and compete in Abu Dhabi. When one of them won in his class in judo, the gold medal, they played Hatikva. They had a minister of culture and culture and sport come. So you have had an evolution. I think what you'll see with the Saudis is not suddenly they're going to normalize with Israel. But what they will do is they'll begin to take steps. And Palestinians, there should be a parallelism. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to say, how do we take advantage of a moment that at least creates a different kind of possibility than exists? Our bigger problem is that the Israeli public and the Palestinian public have lost hope and belief. And as Ali says, there's a crisis in Palestinian leadership. So given that circumstance, what can you do to change the situation, as opposed to saying we can't do anything, we have to have all or nothing? In the Middle East, we know when you go for everything and the choice is everything or nothing, you get nothing. My fear about the nothing is it will lead to what Ali's saying, which is at some point some kind of explosion. With all the moves that might be made, if the Palestinians are never a part of it, they can't be wished away. So you have that basic problem. I want to say one thing about what Ali said in addition. We have two national movements competing for the same space. Two national identities. Neither one of these national identities are going to go away. They have to be respected, and they have to be allowed to be that aspiration to be realized. I don't see it in a one state. You're going to have two national identities. One tries to dominate the other. In the Middle East, when you look at one state where there's more than one identity, national, tribal, sectarian, Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Libya, these are states that are either at war with each other, within each other, or they're paralyzed. That's not what we hope for the future here. So the point is, we have to find a way to move forward to achieve two states for two peoples. I fully agree with Ali's point, and I actually wrote the same thing. That when the Trump peace plan came out, I was highly critical of its content. But I said, this is a moment for the Palestinians. Come out with your own proposal. Don't just come out with a repetition of the past slogans. Come out with a serious proposal. That actually can change the situation. We still haven't seen that, and it's difficult because of what you were asking. There's division among the Palestinians between Hamas and Fatah, between the West Bank and Gaza. There are many of the people around Abu Mazen are positioning themselves for succession. This is not a context in where it's easy, and this is the heart of your question, where it's easy for Palestinian leaders to make decisions. So there's a need somehow in this environment I'm describing to come up with a diplomacy that can help. And I wasn't saying there shouldn't be a third party, but I'm saying the third party needs to be effective in terms of how it helps.
Ali, you're less sanguine about the two-state solution, and you might have said this because I was having technical problems, but what is your other solution? Would it be one state? And Dennis doesn't think that'll work. Do you think it'll work?
No, I agree with Ambassador Dennis. In an ideal world, it's the ideal solution. But we know that's not going to go. It's not going to work. And we know that in one hand, Jewish people want to be a majority in a place where they can decide or manage their destiny and future. On the other hand, Palestinians are thirsty for political recognition for their national identity. I still believe in two states, but I don't believe in divided two states. I think that we need a statehood as a matter of nationalism as identity, but we need a full cooperation and normalization with the state of Israel. And free pass, I mean, recently there is this initiative of two state, one homeland or land for all that guarantees statehood for both, but also access to both sides with work with, because you can build any design of peace initiative, but if this doesn't speak about the people of the land in both sides, it will not. Everyone has to feel engaged. Everyone has to be represented and respected. Finally, I will say that it's our mission to decide. I mean, the people of the land has to decide their destiny. It's not others who are proposing solutions, whether they become rejected by whether the Palestinians or the Israelis. I think deep inside us, we know that both sides are not going to go anywhere. Number two, we don't want to go anywhere. Number three, we will fight until the last drop of blood because this is the only place where we, Palestinian and Jewish, belong historically, belong ideologically, belong, even politically. So for that, we don't have to be Mandelas to realize that. Under that umbrella, we have to encourage a joint actions and joint political approach that can lead there. And the international pressure that we need is not on the people themselves. We need the encouragement and the pressure on political leadership, not by going somewhere else and start building peace while your main real partners are struggling on the ground because of the conflict. That's what I mean. I'm not against any approach for any state to normalize its relation with anyone. I don't decide, not for the Emirates, and I don't decide for Israel, but I'm part of the Israeli political framework because I am the one who's living the injustice under the Israeli occupation. You cannot treat Israel normally politically since Israel is part of the international community and signed in all the agreement that guarantee dignity and human rights for all the countries around Israel. I will be in a situation of peace, a real peace that defend and protect my dignity. I will be a soldier to fight for the security of Israel, not the opposite.
Can I,
But then,
I understand where Ali wants to go. What the two of us agree on is the kind of vision we'd like to see for the future. What we're talking about is what's the best way to get from where we are to that vision. I'm suggesting that this process of normalization that we see taking place in the region, it's not going to be stopped. Whether the Palestinians want it or don't want it, it's not going to be stopped because you see other Arab states are going to act in terms of their interests. I'm raising the issue, how can you turn that to the Palestinian advantage? And I believe there's a way to do that. I believe there's a lever here that the Palestinians can use with the Arab states, as long as they don't say, you can't do anything until I'm satisfied. Instead, come up with a plan. It would help the Arab states if the Palestinians came up with their own peace proposal. It would help Arab states if the Palestinians said, all right, here's a series of steps that would be good to change the realities for us on a day-to-day basis. What I'm suggesting is you're going to have a process that's going to move ahead regardless, because Arab states have decided it's in their interest to do this. So it doesn't mean the Saudis are going to do it, as I said before, all at once, but they'll move in stages. Well, that still creates a potential lever for the Palestinians if they work with the Saudis or if they work with other Arab states. or if the U.S. in its diplomacy would realize, okay, we're not going to produce everything at once, but here's what we can produce, and here's how we're going to use Arab outreach to Israel to help the Palestinians, to provide a cover for the Palestinians for the steps that they themselves may take. It may be that the Palestinians will use Arabs, as I said earlier, to help shape a proposal on peace. The point is there's a lot of potential here if the Palestinians will work with these Arab states and not simply adopt a posture of being against them.
But you're talking about the Palestinians, and Ali and you have said there really is no effective Palestinian leadership now. So Ali, does it have to come from, these kinds of peace negotiations are all from the top down. Do you think in terms of the Palestinian, the change has to come from the bottom up because it's not found among the leaders?
Yes, this is what I have been doing for the last 4 years. I just came to the conclusion that Palestinian people should adopt nonviolence as their own identity and start building a massive movement that will guarantee two things and even remove the confusion between two things. One thing is the identity of revolution, that we practice our belonging to the land by resisting and just resisting Israel. The other identity is citizenship and responsibility by developing our own conditions, fixing our society, taking responsibility, because not everything is because of the occupation. We have a tremendous responsibility within our own society, corruption, leadership, social values, all of the human and respectful values that we need to create. This is number one. Number two, I think there is a huge gap between the society itself, the people, and the political leadership. And this cannot work in our society by this gap. We cannot respond to others, but we also cannot initiate our own initiative if we don't create a full cooperation between the society and the leadership. And the society cannot be divided between political parties who are fighting each other, because we are the loser of the game. By the end of the day, this will be used against us, whether by Israel or by the international community. That's why I said today we Palestinians are facing ourselves in the mirror. Now we have to do the homework first. We have to ask everyone in the Palestinian society, what do you want? Because by the end of the day, I promise you, no one has a plan. No one has a plan interiorly, and no one has a plan politically outside. We just initiate things, or we proact, we don't act. So we react, we don't act. So we need a new behavior on the ground that will guarantee pressure, encouragement, engagement of everyone. And we need to tell the whole world what we exactly want and how do we want to do that. Begging for peace is not the way that I believe in. And we should stop acting as victims. It's not khalas. We are tired of this game. And this competition of suffering between two sides, it just keep us under everything, and it rise the relation with Israel in everywhere. Because I think Palestinians are intelligent, clever, active, energized enough to create the best model that they can propose to the whole world and even engage the world if this model guarantee a non-violence approach. So this is my role as an activist on the ground. As I told you, I'm not a politician. Maybe I am. I don't know, because by the end of the day, everyone is a politician. But I am a leader, and there is a big difference between politicians and leaders. If the Israeli government today know exactly what his leadership is about, they will realize that going and leaving Palestinians behind them and going to the Arab world will create a kind of explosion in the ground, because I care about Jewish blood. I care about my people's blood. This will leave us with just a new circle of violence. And Abbas will lose his control on the Palestinian society because he failed to bring any political change on the ground, so people will stop believing on him.
Dennis, on the Israeli side, one of the things Tom Friedman had just written that Kushner and the Kushner peace plan, Israel was offered pretty much everything it wanted in exchange for a Palestinian state on a much smaller percentage of land surrounded by Israel. And his point was that Netanyahu still rejected that. So is there any does that show that there's really no interest, no plan that the Palestinians could come up with that Israel would ever accept because they're just opposed to a Palestinian state?
Well, I think there's a segment of Israel that's opposed to a Palestinian state, but the majority of Israelis, if they believed that the Palestinians accepted their right to be there, would favor a two-state outcome. You know, what Ali is talking about, if there was a Palestinian leadership that vision of peace and accepted that there was a historic Jewish connection to the land and that they have a right to be there, it doesn't negate the Palestinian right, but it recognizes the Israeli right. I think you would see a very different attitude among Israelis. The problem on the Israeli side is that the peace camp was killed. The second intifada killed the peace camp, and it hasn't recovered. Think about it. You had in 2015, you had an election. Bougie Herzog was the leader of labor at that time. The Zionist Union, they call themselves. I've known him for years. I know his commitment to the idea of peace, but he couldn't even raise it as an issue in the campaign because he would look naive. That's what's happened. You know, you didn't see Gantz in the last election. You didn't see him raising it as an issue. In a sense, Israelis hate to be seen as friars, as suckers, and they became convinced that the Palestinians will never really accept the idea of a state of the Jewish people. What Ali is suggesting is there is that recognition, and if you had a Palestinian leadership that embodied that, it would be different. My point is you can change the attitudes in Israel. One way to do it is by showing acceptance in the region. What Ali is saying, that acceptance in the region comes increasingly at a Palestinian expense. I'm suggesting there are ways for it not to come at the Palestinian expense, but that is a perception, and I understand that's a perception. But there's an Israeli public perception as well. On the one hand, it gets reassured by regional acceptance, and if there were moves, if we could begin to orchestrate moves that were Israeli and Palestinian moves together, it would change the attitudes within Israel. Right now, there's no question that the attitudes, the country has moved towards the right, that the left in Israel is much weaker than it used to be. And if you want to strengthen the center, there has to be this sense that, okay, we can be a part of this region, and the Palestinians accept that we can have a state that is a state of the Jewish people. The more that impression is created, the more flexibility you'll see on the Israeli side.
But what you're saying is there's not going to be a change in Israeli attitudes till there's a change in Palestinian leadership. And then Ali is saying there's really no great hope there in Palestinian leadership. So what you're talking about is another year of stasis.
I'm saying it doesn't have to be stasis, because I'm saying you can use what is this process of normalization with the Arab states to create what the UAE did, a linkage to the Palestinian issue. What the Emirates did is they said, okay, you want normalization, we'll give you normalization, but you can't go ahead and annex these territories. So they created a linkage. Now others can take that and say, okay, the UAE prevented a negative. We want a positive. That's the way you overcome the stasis, because otherwise we are locked into what is a stalemate. I'm looking for ways to break that stalemate and improve the realities for both sides. The day-to-day realities for Palestinians improve and can create a sense of hope. Look, what Ali said is the level of alienation of Palestinians from their leadership, whether it's in the West Bank or in Gaza, is enormous. There's a perception. They understand the level of corruption. They understand the absence of the rule of law. They also understand that they seem to be not considered at all. So, there needs to be hope recreated for the Palestinians. There also needs to be hope created on the Israeli side.
Ali, talking about what creates hope on the Palestinian side, the Jewish holiday, this time of year is really about looking inside and changing our hearts, changing our behavior. What do you think it'll take within Palestinian society to change people's hearts, whether to soften them towards the Israelis or to give them hope to fight in the struggle? What do the Palestinians need from the outside or from the inside?
Maybe it's the time to ask ourselves, instead of saying what can create hope, let's ask ourselves what created the despair that we are facing today. Because if we know where this despair came from, I think we know how to design hope. And maybe with Ambassador Ross, with all of my respect to so much of what he said, I think the failure of the peace process was not by the second intifada. I think it has failed before the intifada, years before the intifada, because it was missing the practical steps on the ground, and it ignored the core of the problem, which is the Israeli settlement mostly, and the Palestinian refugees mostly. And I don't want to go there as a politician to give you answers. On the other hand, for your question, Rob, I think what I believe today that we have enough despair to create hope in Palestine. If we have knowledge where this despair comes from, then we will have two missions, one mission with two behaviors. One is to start looking to our own home and analyzing and studying and even learning. Why is this happening to us? But in a new way of thinking, because you can blame the whole world. By the end of the day, as Ambassador Ross said, the whole world will continue going forward, and then you continue go back. This is not the time to do that, and this is not the right strategy. Number two, yes, I do believe that this is the time for my political leadership to propose a new plan and start engaging everyone, because you cannot just reject things. You have to come up with alternatives where people can listen to you. Finally, I'm telling you that if we succeed, Israelis and Palestinians, to do one thing, I think this will be so much hopeful. If we stop judging or arguing each other identities and start shifting to argue each other behaviors, I think we will achieve peace. Because occupation, violence, corruption are behaviors. It's not the people identity. We have to have recognition for each other, and on that we have to have a secure environment to recognize each other. Because if you are not secure in the future for that recognition, then the recognition itself will become a threat, because we are not equal. So the oppressor will become more powerful, and the oppressed will keep acting as victims. On the other hand, I think today every citizen of this land has to redesign his existence on the ground. Means that if we in our heart, in our mind as Palestinian has rejected the existence of Israel, I think if we keep doing that, we are doing a big mistake. On the other hand, if Israel will keep acting, assuming that Palestinians are weak, whether by their own leadership or because of the international community or the Arabs are becoming pro-Israel more or can normalize more, I think Israel is doing a big mistake. Because Palestinian, as they could be the huge gate among Israel to the whole world, they could also block it easily.
Dennis, did you have something? I wanted to get your reaction to that. Do you think that it's possible to kind of move beyond the past, move beyond the second intifada, as you were saying, move beyond who did what when, and kind of look at current behavior going forward?
Well, in a sense, what I'm saying is that if we stay prisoners of the past, we'll guarantee a perpetuation of the past. We have to break free of the past in order to create a different kind of future. Look, the most important thing that Ali is saying is, and he's said it several times, Palestinians have to look in the mirror and they have to ask themselves, why are we where we're at? There's no question nothing's going to change unless there is that kind of introspection. Israelis, I think Israelis also have to recognize, because the Palestinians are not going anywhere, they may look at what's going on now and say it's a Palestinian loss. But it won't be an Israeli gain if the outcome is, okay, fine, one binational state. That won't be an Israeli gain. That will be an Israeli loss.
But Dennis, it doesn't seem that the Israelis feel that yet. They don't feel that in the same way that the Palestinians feel the oppression and the problems that it is to live in the West Bank under Israeli occupation. They feel that every day, whereas the Israelis seem to be not only oblivious to it mostly, but because of this opening up to the other Arab worlds, their lives are about to get better.
No, look, there's no, to be honest, right now, most Israelis aren't thinking about the normalization. They're thinking about COVID-19 and the economic implications.
Right.
That's the overriding issue. So we have to get beyond that before there's going to be any more serious change. I do think this kind of a discussion is helpful on both sides, because I'm trying to say, in the end, what we need to create is a win-win for Israelis and Palestinians, not a win-loss. And the image of a win-loss is an illusion, because sooner or later it won't be a gain for the Israelis, it'll be a loss for the Israelis. You're right, they're not there now, for sure. But you know, the more you focus on the reality that if there's no resolution of the Palestinian issue, there's going to be an inevitable move towards a one-state outcome, which I said is not a prescription for peace, not a prescription for fulfillment of national identity. It'll be a prescription for endless conflict and paralysis. So what we need both sides to be able to say, in effect, what Ali was saying. There has to be this kind of mutual recognition. Israelis need to recognize that there is a Palestinian identity and a narrative. They don't have to fully accept the narrative, but they have to accept this is what Palestinians feel. Palestinians have to accept that Israelis have a view and an attachment to the land that they have to acknowledge as well. I said it before. I mean, President Obama once asked me, why is this conflict so hard to solve? And I said, because you're trying to reconcile two rights. It's not a right and a wrong. There are two rights, and you have to reconcile the two rights. And the more that consciousness on both sides can be acknowledged, the more we'll move in a more hopeful direction for the future.
Do you think the approach that the Trump administration has taken is a more fruitful approach? In other words, to kind of put the Palestinian issue now a little bit to the side and focus more on the regional normalization?
I didn't agree with their plan, because their plan created the illusion of a Palestinian state, not the reality of a Palestinian state. They were trying to create an outcome for the Israeli-Palestinian issue. They were trying to produce what they thought was a complete resolution of the issue. They didn't build their approach based on the Arabs. It's the Arabs who came to them to stop the annexation. Their plan set in motion what Netanyahu, Prime Minister Netanyahu, wanted to take advantage of. He said, look, I want to go ahead and annex the 30% that's given to us. And to be fair to the administration, they began to say, well, but our plan as a whole peace plan, it's not an annexation plan. But they only set what I call a blinking yellow light, slowing down the process of annexation. They weren't prepared to stop it. In fact, quietly, they were going to the Palestinian Authority and saying, look, if you don't come and talk to us, annexation will go ahead. They were trying to use that as a lever on the Palestinians. What ended up happening is that the Emirates came to them and said, annexation is a disaster because it's going to end the prospect of two states. It's going to produce a backlash. Iran and Turkey will exploit it. Stop the annexation. And the administration came to the conclusion they would do it once the Emirates said, we'll normalize if you stop the annexation. So it wasn't as if the plan was to reach out to the Arabs to begin with. The plan was basically right. Now the irony is, okay, they took advantage of, in a sense, what was an initiative by the Emirates. Now what I'm saying is, okay, I understand what Ali is saying. I'm again repeat the point.
Right.
Other Arab states are going to continue to do this. So the issue is, don't fight it. How do you take advantage of it? That's my point.
Ali, how could we talked about the need for Israelis to see what will happen if they don't confront the Palestinian issue. How could nonviolence help them see that? Like, how specifically could your nonviolent movement help Israelis see their need to come and make reconcile with Palestinians?
I think it's by actions and by statements. I think if the Israeli society will see 100,000 Palestinians in the street, standing non-violently, demanding and asking for a peaceful solution, that I don't believe in just solution, by the way, I believe in fair solution, that there will be a fair solution to and will recognize both sides and their rights, their historical roots to the land, with the system, with a movement on the ground as a massive national movement by the Palestinian, with a political plan or a political statement that will consider these facts. I think the most Israeli society not just will be inspired, will be affected even by that plan. On the other hand, my other fear and my deep fear, and who knows more than like you, Ambassador Ross, that between different political periods, what are the prices that people have to pay? So when you ask about hope, the Palestinian society conditions are miserable today in each direction. Just imagine students, they graduate from high schools and they go to work in settlements instead of going to universities. So from now to, I don't know what will happen in 2, 3 years, what will happen to a whole generation that will lose hope. So let's guarantee, at least as activists, as politicians, as leaders, let's guarantee some dignified life for the people on the ground until this movement or political leadership will take effective role. This is my mission as an activist on the ground, because I told you I'm not a politician there, and I cannot even be a politician in this system, because I cannot be a politician with no resources, and I cannot be a politician that doesn't represent the majority of my people, and I cannot be a politician without a system of democracy, and I cannot be a politician in a system that lives under other authority. I cannot even guarantee peaceful actions on the ground. So that's why I think it will start from the people, not from the political leadership, and not because they are good or bad, because the political resources around any politician in Palestine also add to the corruption and the interior behavior. The resources are bad, almost missing. And I don't believe in the international community coming to feel sorry about us. I don't want anyone to feel sorry about me, because I want the people to believe that we can be partners. We are enough intelligent, we are enough human to become partners with Israel and with the whole world. We want the world to believe in us, not by just sending money and millions of dollars that I don't know what's the end of it. I want, as the Chinese say, don't give me a fish, teach me how to do fishing. We
Dennis,
want to partner with the world. We want to create the most democratic, secular society in the Middle East. We want a place where Jewish and Palestinian, when they pray wherever they want to pray with safety, but also to welcome each other. Because, by the way, we cannot exist without each other. I don't believe in divorce. I don't believe in full marriage between us, and I don't believe in total divorce. We have to have the partnership together, which is not full marriage as one state and not divorce as two separated states. So my
Dennis,
mission and my movement mission, Tagir, today is to guarantee engagement of the society in a social change that hopefully will guarantee political change on the ground.
Dennis, do you think a nonviolent movement from the Palestinians will actually help push Israeli society in the right direction? You're muted. Dennis, you're muted.
I know.
Oh.
Sometimes technology is the biggest enemy for peace.
Okay, now it's, yeah.
Now you're good.
Repeat your question, sorry.
Ali talked about a massive nonviolent movement among Palestinians. Do you think that could get Israelis where they need to be in terms of recognizing the need to deal with the Palestinians?
I think that if I felt for a long time, had the Palestinian movement always been nonviolent, you would have had the Israeli public on the Palestinian side. There's no question, and I think that remains true. If you combine what Ali was saying with I'll just put it this way: what Ali represents is a kind of revolution in the Palestinian mind, not to be a victim, to assume responsibility, to be nonviolent, to acknowledge the Israelis have a right to be there. You do those things, you will change the reality in Israel. And as he said, it can't happen overnight. His challenge, his charge, his mission is one that is a huge mission. It's not going to happen overnight, but if he succeeds, it will change things. What I'm suggesting, I'm looking at it from, okay, how do we create a better climate for Palestinians so they become more hopeful? If they become more hopeful, they'll be much more likely to embrace his vision. Right now, they're angry, they're frustrated, they're alienated. And in a climate like that, it's a whole lot easier for extremists to motivate them than for someone who's offering a hopeful vision. So I look at it, what's happening right now is something that we need to use to try to improve the realities on the ground, create more of a sense of possibility, and then this mission that he has, I think, has a greater chance of success. Ultimately, his mission is a mission that offers the greatest promise for real peace and reconciliation between Israelis and Palestinians.
Well, we have to sign off, and I'm gonna leave it there with a sense of hope, because the holidays are about hope and change, and maybe we'll get some hope and change this year for all the people there.
Rob, excuse me. I just wanna end by what President Barack Obama said in Tel Aviv when he visited while he was a president. He said, people has to know that political leadership will not be courageous enough to take painful steps, to sign and take painful decisions for peace if the two communities doesn't push them there. And I think this is the way to do it here. Palestinian and Israelis has to be pushing their own leadership to sit on the table and come up with solution. And Ambassador Ross, I'm inviting you for whatever you can do to partner with us and to work together. Maybe this land will be better for the people. And thank you for doing this with me. Thank you, Rob.
Thank you. First, Ali, nice to meet you virtually, and I very much believe in everything you're trying to do.
Great. You two have never met before?
No.
Oh my God. Well, this
man is a big guy. He's a big politician. I'm just a small citizen.
Well, you're both wonderful people.
I'm a small citizen too.
You're both wonderful, and you should really get to know each other. And this is a great way to start the year. So, Shana Tova, and thank you both.
Thank you.
Hope everybody, thank you for listening. Have a great new year. Bye.